What do you think of when I mention Call of Duty? Maybe you think back to the quote-unquote golden age of gaming. Maybe you think of the Modern Warfare trilogy, the good ones. Maybe you think of Black Ops 1 and 2. Maybe you are old enough to remember playing the original Call of Duty, or maybe you are young enough to see what it has become. For the former, I envy you. I was born in 2000, which means I was the perfect age to see what many believe to be the best Call of Duty games. But I do wish I could have seen it grow through the years. For the latter, however, it is not envy but pity that I feel. These most recent Call of Duties have genuinely been some of the worst and most exploitative experiences I've ever had. These experiences have been so bad, in fact, that I and many people have just completely stopped playing. This mass exodus from Call of Duty is because of so many reasons. Some quit because of the greed of Modern Warfare 3's 4-hour campaign. Some quit because of the seemingly complete abandonment of classic round-based zombies. But many quit because of the multiplayer. What once was an escape has now turned into a hellscape. Where once you found fun, you now only find frustration. Where once you could find a surprisingly simple milsim experience featuring tight gunplay and an emphasis on correct positioning, now you find an overly complex, overly monetized, and overly sweaty experience, built meticulously to trap you in a never-ending cycle. The way Call of Duty does this is by skill-based matchmaking, also known as engagement-based matchmaking. Like I mentioned earlier, me and many others have left, finding new and better games to play, like this year's Helldivers 2. But many are still trapped in the evil clutches of Call of Duty, hoping for a hero to save them. And for the longest time, these people have been told to just hang on. A savior is almost here. The Call of Duty killer is just around the corner, and its name is XDefiant. Call of Duty players heard this again and again, and during this time not much was known about the game, other than it was
fast-paced firefight meets punk rock mosh pit.
Whatever that means. But we were still clamoring for an alternative, and so, while we watched trailers come out and closed betas come and go, we waited with bated breath. Finally, in 2024, nearly 2 years after the announcement trailer, players finally got their hands on the prophesized COD killer. And while some had fun, unfortunately my experience with the game was after playing for about 20 hours and experiencing everything the game has to offer, I'm just disappointed with XDefiant. And I found the game to be extra bleak, extra boring, extra bland, and extra broken. So, set up a chair, grab your popcorn, and let Soapy talk to you, while we take a look at the many reasons why XDefiant is in XTrouble. Let's start first with what I mentioned last, how the game is extra broken. I want to highlight this because it's honestly the game's biggest issue right now, and one that you more than likely have experienced at least once if you had downloaded and tried the game. Even if you disagree with my other points and enjoy the game, this problem may be the reason you jump ship. So, enough dancing around it. How is this game extra broken? Well, the problem lays solely in the game's hit registration and netcode. During my time with the game, I felt like I was being shot through walls at least once every single game. Sometimes it would just deal a small bit of damage before I could get clear, but more often than not, it would be the result of my death, which is extremely frustrating. This issue has worked both against me and with me though, as I found myself killing people while I can't even see them, and every time this happens, I just feel dirty. This problem also extends to hit registration, as there has been numerous times where my bullets just don't contact with the enemy, often resulting in me losing gunfights that I have the advantage in. This makes the game feel extremely inconsistent, as time to kill can range drastically due to my bullets just not hitting enemies. This experience is extremely frustrating for the player, and look through the game's Reddit page will show you the amount of people that are experiencing this issue. Now, to his credit, the game's executive producer Mark Rubin has put out a community post saying that these issues are their top priority. And while that is good to hear, it's also important to remember that this game has had off and on closed betas for at least a year now, and these problems have been apparent since day one, and since then nothing has changed. The full release is almost identical to what was played back then, with almost nothing being changed. If these problems were not ironed out in that year, I'm worried about when they will be fixed. These netcode and hit registration problems may sound familiar to fans of another Ubisoft property though. Fans of Ubisoft's tactical shooter Rainbow Six Siege are far too familiar with server issues and problems. The problem was so large, in fact, that the dev team delayed a whole season's worth of content and instead dedicated the season to fixing and repairing the game.
Operation Health is basically a 3-month period of time that we're going to be taking in order to fixing and repairing the game, as well as investing in core technologies and online techs to make sure that the game is as long-lasting as possible.
This season was deemed Operation Health, and while some hated it, I believe that this season single-handedly saved Siege, as it fixed many problems that the game had. Unfortunately, I don't think XDefiant can afford this same thing to happen to them, even though it is very needed, as XDefiant simply can't nor afford to lose players in this time. I talk more about this later, but I believe Rainbow Six Siege was able to survive Operation Health because the game was so unique. The only thing close to it at the time was Counter-Strike, but Counter-Strike was only available to PC players, while Rainbow Six Siege was available on console. Because of really being the only tactical shooter, it could afford to dedicate a whole season to these fixes. XDefiant, however, is fighting an uphill battle with all of its competition. Those who have played the game may also run into another massive problem. That is players bunny hopping around corners and in fights, making it almost impossible to stay on target, as they seemingly are able to defy the laws of physics as they move back and forth while in midair. Again, this is something that Mark Rubin has addressed and said the team is working on. But this one I'm less likely to believe, as with the game's release, Ubisoft's own YouTube channel put out a video giving the players some tips on how to play like a pro in XDefiant. And in the video they encourage players to be mobile, showing pros jumping and sliding around corners in order to get the upper hands in fights. This showed players that this is how they should be playing the game. So why would Ubisoft and Mark Rubin change something they encourage you to do? This was also a problem in the playtest a year ago, which tells me if this is something they really wanted to address, they would have done it by now. What they have done is make it so that repeated jumping expands your crosshair, making your next couple of shots wildly inaccurate. At least for the shotguns. Assault rifles, SMGs, and sniper rifles appear to get this penalty as well, but as soon as you aim down the sights, it's gone, so the penalty really only affects the guns that nobody are using. Speaking of sniper rifles, those pesky guns really rifle my feathers. I would say XDefiant has a medium time to kill. It doesn't feel very fast or slow, but it still takes some time. Sniper rifles, however, have the ability to one-shot from the chest up. And now, while I will admit that these snipers are a little difficult to get the hang of, if you get into a lobby with someone who can use one efficiently, you're going to have a very frustrating time, as they will outgun you at any range, no matter what. If you challenge at medium to long range, they will one-shot you, and if you rush in with an SMG, they will one-shot you before you can even get 3 shots on them. These one-shot snipers make the game extremely frustrating to play, as there is seemingly no counter for them, as snipers have little to no flinch when aimed down sights, making staying on target very easy. This means that the only real way to win a fight against a sniper is for them to miss their shot, taking away any control from the player. This one-shot sniper problem also contributes to another problem the game has, a problem with inconsistency. Inconsistent time to kill as of now is being attributed to the netcode by many, but would it surprise you to know that this inconsistent feel is quite literally baked into the game, as the Phantoms faction have a passive ability giving them 20 extra health, meaning it takes 1 extra bullet to kill them. Now 1 extra bullet may not sound like a lot, but what that means is that if you and a Phantom get into a fight and you both hit an equal amount of shots on each other, the Phantom will win the gunfight every time. This has led to gunfights that I just barely lose, leaving the enemy with just a sliver of health left. Combine this with the fact that it's hard to tell exactly who you are fighting at times, means you aren't exactly sure how many bullets are needed to drop an enemy at any given time. It's also extremely frustrating when you have a sneaky little flank catching a Phantom with their back turned, yet they're able to turn on you because of their extra health. It sucks to see them with just 1 health left on the kill screen, as you know that if there were any other character you would have won the gunfight. Seeing the kill screen after a death like that is just deflating to the player. Although I don't really know how much these kill screens can be trusted, as oftentimes it will show either the wrong player completely, or show the player having full health even though I saw multiple shots connecting. While I will admit every game has bugs, the problems here make the game feel cheap. The game's matchmaking in of itself can also be extremely frustrating for the player. As of the making of this video, there is no persistent lobbies, meaning every single time after a match, your lobby will be disbanded and you'll be forced to find a new one. This hurts the player experience in 2 major ways. First, because it's having to find a new lobby every single time, it increases queue times, meaning you'll be playing the game less. Secondly, the game often fails to find lobbies that haven't started yet, and often forces the players into a match in progress, and 9 out of 10 times will be put on the losing team. This gives the player an extremely unsatisfying experience. Finding a match exposes the game even more, as you'll see balance also needs a ton of work with certain factions like the Phantoms and Echelon running supreme. There were actually many times where I'd be on a team of just Phantoms, or just Echelon, or a mix of both. When you combine these two classes, it's almost a cheat code, as the Phantoms get a bulletproof wall as well as increased health, and Echelon get a free wall hack every 30 seconds. Next to Phantoms and Echelon is DedSec, purely for the Spider Drone, which again is pretty much a free kill every 30 seconds, as it not only pathfinds the nearest target, but when it finds them it latches onto the target's face, stunning them in place and dealing damage, giving the player an easy pickup kill. When it comes to the Cleaners, they may have the cheesiest ability in the game, as the Firebomb is essentially a glorified sewer slide bomb, as you have to run to a group of enemies and press one button for a couple of kills. The Libertad gives increased healing to you and the team, yet it doesn't feel like enough to make a noticeable difference. Their ultra abilities where they shine though, turning you and nearby allies into basically a juggernaut, capable of withstanding massive amounts of damage. Pretty much all of these abilities are extremely annoying to play against. Fighting an enemy who has a one-way shield up is extremely frustrating. Getting pinged by wall hacks every 30 seconds, while also having to be on the lookout for invisible players, is extremely frustrating. Dying to an enemy who only pressed one button for a get out of jail free card is extremely frustrating. Getting stun locked by the Spider Drone is extremely frustrating. This is all so sad to see because it's an issue that can't really be fixed. At its core, this is a hero shooter, so these abilities are an essential part of gameplay. Yet they're just not fun to play against, which makes the player feel frustrated. Moving on now to how the game is extra bland, and I think this problem stems from the fact that the game suffers from not having its own unique identity. You see, in XDefiant, there's different factions you play as. Think classic COD, where you'd have Op4 versus the Rangers, except it's not like that at all. In XDefiant, it's your team versus the enemy team. These teams are made up of different smaller factions from all the Ubisoft properties. Each of these factions has their own unique abilities, both active and passive, as well as an ultra ability. Now, I already talked a little bit about these abilities in the previous section, so I won't bore you with them again. What I will cover now is the people of these factions, starting with the two that are probably the most recognizable, which are the Libertad of Far Cry 6 and DedSec of Watch Dogs 2. Now, I extensively played both of these games. I was Danny Rojas. I helped the Libertad by Libertading all of Yara with my trusty robot canine companion. And Yara, silly goose, if you didn't think that I didn't go up to each Libertad that I fought beside to give them a nice, firm handshake as a way to show my appreciation. However, through my travels of Yara, I never saw or met Zelda, or Beto, or Celeste, meaning I have no connection to these characters even though I played their respective game. The same can be said of DedSec. I was Marcus Holloway. I joined the ranks of DedSec, I met Hot Sauce, flirted with Wrench, beat up random people in the park, and bashed people indiscriminately with my yo-yos of justice. But throughout my time with the game, I never once met Sebastian, or Gia, or Ying. The lack of connection makes these characters feel generic and bland. Filling your game with essentially playable cardboard cutouts is not a good system for sustainability. For a great example of this, let's look at Rainbow Six Siege again. More specifically, let's take a look at Thermite. For those familiar, you will know that Thermite is a hard breacher, which is a role that is essential on pretty much every single team. This is a role that I was not entirely interested in playing. However, after I read Thermite's character bio, this completely changed. Right off the bat, everything here looks pretty boilerplate, but once we get down to the bottom, I saw something that immediately stuck out to me. A look at the bio says that Thermite went to Texas A&M. Texas A&M is where my parents met and eventually got married. And through my younger years, I would always watch Texas A&M football with my mom and saw many games in person. So seeing that Thermite went there immediately gave me a personal connection to the character. And now nearly a decade later, I am still a Thermite main and have this unbreakable connection that makes the character feel real. This connection allows me to take the character out of the game, and it also regularly pulls me back to the game to play it. Each time I boot up R6 and select him, it's like saying hello to an old friend. This type of connection with your character is extremely important for both player retention as well as fostering a community around your game. Many extremely popular games like Overwatch and Call of Duty have fostered communities of extremely passionate fans that both play the games and those who watch it from the sidelines. Tracer is one of the most popular video game characters of all time, and the cinematic shorts they have put out are genuine masterpieces. I still get chills when I watch the short with Hanzo and Genji, and that short is the sole reason I actually bought the first Overwatch game, and why I was a Genji main for a long time. Call of Duty has also done a masterful job with fostering connections with the player. If you ask any boy who their favorite COD character is, you may hear Captain Price or Ghost. If you asked me, I would say Soap, as he is one of my favorite fictional characters of all time, and my usernames are basically based around him. Again, these are connections that can exist out of the game and be exposed to people who don't even know what your game is. I mean, this extends to characters who aren't even in the campaigns. For those who didn't know, there's a huge fanfiction community dedicated to Ghost X Koenig fanfiction, and I bet half the people reading those never played Call of Duty. Yet they're still very aware of the game and its characters, giving these characters a life outside of their respective titles. With XDefiant using all of these different Ubisoft properties in their game, it gives me a feel that they're trying to be the Super Smash Bros. Of FPS shooters. But the difference is that Super Smash Bros. Is successful because each character featured in the game brings the uniqueness and personality of its characters. You play Super Smash Bros. Because you want to be Link, you want to be Samus, you want to be Donkey Kong, you want to be Minecraft Steve. Nobody is playing XDefiant to be some random, libertad fighter who we know nothing about. This problem extends past the factions though, as the maps are characters in of itself. The maps featured in XDefiant are also based on the different properties of Ubisoft, and contain Easter eggs from each of them, but that's about as far as their personality goes. Each of these maps are too small and too linear, often constricting the player into taking certain paths, funneling them into the choke points where they die again and again, gaining only a few inches each time. These linear maps also leave little to no room for flanking routes, making the player feel stuck and frustrated. This problem lays solely on the design team, as many of them come from the Black Ops 1 and 2 days, and while traditional 3-lane maps were legendary back then, their over-reliance on them here, I fear, has hurt the game as a whole, as these maps do not give the player many unique options in engaging with firefights. These maps also suffer from an immersion problem. When it comes to the objects scattered around these maps, I was extremely disappointed to find how static everything is. From computers that just slightly change their model when shot, to bags and books that are not interactable. Cars scattered across all maps are seemingly bulletproof and explosive proof, as I tried again and again to get them to explode or even just catch fire, yet all I got was nothing. All this showed me again and again how bland this game was, as these static maps take away from my experience of the game. While I will admit these problems are slight nitpicks, an interactive map makes the game feel more alive, and it gives me something to remember. Look at Overwatch and the map Nepal. I remember hoping to load into that map every time I played, just for the sole reason of getting to shoot the basketball in the spawn room. This tiny interactive detail made this one of my favorite maps in the whole game because it has personality. None of the maps in XDefiant offer this level of interactivity and expression, making me feel static and bland just like the rest of the game. Up next, I want to talk about how I found the game to be extra boring, just due to the repetitive nature of it. While there are 14 maps at the launch of this game, these maps are split up into arena maps and progression maps, with there being 10 arena maps and 4 progression maps, meaning if you prefer progression modes like Escort or Zone Control, you will likely find yourself playing on the same maps over and over again. Weapon progression doesn't help the repetitiveness of this game either, as weapon leveling feels extremely slow, meaning you'll find yourself using the same gun with the same attachments again and again. Each gun has all the same attachments unlocked in the exact same order as well, making even using a new gun feel repetitive, as you should expect to unlock the reflex sight, then the recon barrel, then the super light grip, then the heavy grip, and then the holographic sight, in the same order with every single gun in the game. I believe this slow weapon progression to be a deliberate decision to try two different things. First, I believe it's deliberately slow so that you have to spend more time playing the game. The second is a much sinister reason though. I believe the slow progression is to entice you to buy the Season Pass, where you can get yourself some weapon XP boosters, which brings the XP gain to a reasonable level and are pretty much necessary if you want to level up your guns. I believe the biggest reason why the game feels extra boring though, is because of how generic it is. XDefiant is XDefiantly refusing to innovate in any way, and because of this it fails to give a compelling reason to play, as other free-to-play games do what it does but better. Games like Destiny 2 have a compelling story as well as better gunplay. Overwatch offers more unique characters with more interesting abilities. Even tactical shooters like CSGO and Valorant offer more to the player, and other direct competitors like Apex Legends and even Call of Duty Warzone are free. Which leads me to my final topic. The future of XDefiant is extra bleak. Unfortunately, even if this game is successful, it does not mean that it will last. XDefiant has smashed Ubisoft records, quickly becoming its first game to reach 1 million players. Yet I fear it will also be the fastest Ubisoft game to lose 1 million players, as it has a ton of competition, and its release has worse timing than Titanfall 2. Just look at what is happening in gaming right now. 2 days after the game came out, we saw the start of a new season of Fortnite, which is arguably the world's biggest game. We're also getting closer and closer to the release of Destiny 2's The Final Shape, which is set to be the culmination of the Light saga. We're also starting to see ramped up marketing for Black Ops 6 right now, putting the spotlight squarely back on Call of Duty. This game also has to compete with its own publisher, as we still have Star Wars Outlaws and Assassin's Creed Shadows to come out later this year. And I haven't even mentioned the biggest, most anticipated release of the year, EA Sports College Football 24. As I have shown already, XDefiant is just not engaging enough to retain players, and as they leave for other games, I see it to be unlikely that those players return. I also don't believe that the game will achieve its own goal of stealing Call of Duty players simply because it's free to play. Even when we ignore the fact this game fails to innovate in any way and is everything worse than its competitor, I believe that COD players will stay put because they paid for their game. Call of Duty players also more than likely spent some money in the COD store and may have even bought the season pass once or twice. To them, the game is an investment. They have put too much time and too much money to quit cold turkey. Because of this, players will switch over for a day or two and then go crawling right back to COD. Unfortunately, because of all the reasons I just listed, XDefiant is in XTrouble. While we're all hoping for a roaring success, the reality is, XDefiant is extra disappointing. As always, I'm Soapy, and thanks for watching.